The transformation of the electromagnetic spectrum from a medium of communication to a multidimensional battlefield represents one of the most significant shifts in the history of conflict. Electronic warfare, once a specialized discipline focused on radar and radio disruption, has evolved into a foundational element of modern military strategy that integrates signals intelligence, cyber-physical operations, and directed energy weaponry to achieve what is termed spectrum dominance. As military and state actors increasingly prioritize control over the electromagnetic spectrum, the distinction between traditional warfare and civilian surveillance has augmented. Within this environment, the application of directed energy weapons is not confined to the destruction of physical assets, but has expanded into the realm of individualized targeting, harassment, and social engineering. From this perspective, we can contextualize the targeted individual's experiences as an inevitable consequence of electronic warfare. A targeted individual, or TI, is a person who believes they are being subjected to a coordinated campaign of persecution. For the targeted individual, every piece of technology, every passing car, and every seemingly innocuous human interaction can be construed as part of a vast system of psychical and psychological harassment. This growing community numbers approximately 170,000 in the United States and over 1 million worldwide. The discussion concerning targeted individuals is relevant today precisely because their specific experiences, commonly dismissed as paranoia, delusion, or mental illness, mirror the capabilities of modern surveillance infrastructure. The persistent sensation of being watched and pursued, even within the confines of their own homes, the feeling of nowhere to hide, is a central experience for targeted individuals. The modern targeted individual phenomenon, often marginalized and misdiagnosed, is in fact a crucial, albeit disturbing pre-mortem for a world utterly saturated by surveillance capitalism and totalizing state control. This perception finds validation when one examines the overlap between documented historical psychological warfare techniques and the technical capabilities of current surveillance systems. The core of the targeted individual's experience is rooted in two primary pillars: gang stalking, or organized community-based harassment, and electronic harassment, involving not only online surveillance and harassment, but the use of sophisticated technological weaponry such as directed energy weapons, voice-to-skull technologies, and biological interference via electromagnetic frequencies like 5G and Wi-Fi. However, before we examine the claims of exotic technologies like directed energy weapons, we have to start on the ground at the human level. The foundation of the targeted individual experience is a campaign of relentless, low-tech psychological warfare. This is crucial because these human-centric tactics are designed to isolate the target and destroy their credibility long before any advanced technology is ever deployed. This strategy has a clear historical lineage. Many individuals and advocacy groups point to the East German Stasi's Zersetzung, meaning decomposition, technique as a foundational model for their current experiences. Zersetzung was a psychological warfare tactic used to neutralize political dissidents by disrupting their private lives, professional reputations, and social circles through subtle, often unprovable acts of sabotage and gaslighting. In the modern context, these techniques have been refashioned and scaled through the use of digital technology and decentralized networks of participants, often referred to as perpetrators or perps. Reports of gang stalking typically involve a course of conduct that would cause a reasonable person to fear for their safety or suffer extreme emotional distress. Unlike traditional stalking, which is carried out by a single obsessed individual, gang stalking is described as a distributed, system-level operation involving hundreds or even thousands of complicit actors from various walks of life. These actors are perceived to be coordinated by shadowy adversaries, frequently identified as government intelligence agencies, such as the CIA or FBI, local law enforcement, or private security contractors. The intimidation tactics employed in gang stalking are designed to be polysemous, meaning they carry multiple meanings that are only clear to the target. This creates a situation where the victim suffers the cumulative effect of hundreds of seemingly benign acts that an outside observer would dismiss as unremarkable. The primary goal of these tactics is to induce a state of hypervigilance and self-policing, where the target becomes their own jailer, constantly scanning the environment for signs of the conspiracy. This creates a reality that is impossible to explain without sounding paranoid. A common component of the targeted harassment involves a form of psychological manipulation known as street theater. Street theater consists of a group of perpetrators performing an overt, scripted activity in public to draw the victim's attention and signal that they are under constant surveillance. This might take the form of a fake confrontation between strangers near the target, or a couple positioning themselves in a cafe to have a conversation that includes private details of the victim's life, or conditioned words that trigger a stress response. TIs report that these events often feel supernatural or hyper-coordinated, as if the entire city is play-acting a role for the victim's benefit. The psychological power of street theater lies in its ability to destroy the target's sense of public safety. By turning common social interactions into a weapon, the perpetrators ensure that the victim feels vulnerable, even in crowded, well-lit spaces. This leads to severe social withdrawal, as the victim begins to view every stranger as a potential participant in their persecution. Another intimidation tactic used by perps is sensitization. Sensitization is a behavioral conditioning technique where victims are trained to react to common stimuli. For example, anywhere a TI goes, they might encounter someone who coughs as they walk past. Individually, a cough is meaningless, but when repeated hundreds of times in specific proximity to the target, it becomes a psychological trigger. Other forms of sensitization include brighting, the use of high-beam headlights or flashing lights to harass a target during transit, and the overt use of specific colors in clothing or vehicles to signal the presence of the network. Anchoring complements sensitization by planning false rationales for the harassment. Perpetrators may suggest various reasons why the target is being pursued, such as past mistakes, political views, or even supernatural destiny, to keep the victim confused and engaged in a self-perpetuating guessing game. This mental exhaustion prevents the target from developing a coherent defense and causes them to blame themselves for the situation. Perhaps the most controversial and technically complex aspect is the targeted individual's claim of electronic harassment using directed energy and psychotronic weapons. Directed energy weapons is a generic term that refers to any weapon capable of focusing kinetic or electromagnetic energy on a target to cause physical or functional damage. This can be in the form of sonic and acoustic weapons, particle beams, plasma weapons, high-energy lasers, high-power microwave weapons, as well as radio frequency and millimeter wave weapons. Unlike traditional kinetic weapons, DEWs can deliver effects at the speed of light, possess a virtually unlimited magazine, and offer a low cost per shot. In a modern context, the first documented use of a directed energy weapon can be traced back to the Cold War. The Cold War shifted the focus of electronic warfare from tactical disruption to long-term surveillance, signals intelligence, and the covert use of electromagnetic energy against individuals. During this period, both superpowers invested heavily in high-power microwave research and sophisticated listening devices. The Moscow signal remains the most prominent historical example of this shift. From 1953 to 1976, the Soviet Union directed a low-level microwave beam varying between 2.5 and 4.0 gigahertz at the U.S. Embassy in Moscow for the purposes of activating listening devices and interfering with embassy communications. A survey in 1978 suggested that these Moscow unidentified technical signals were used for radio frequency imposition, reading voices off windows, or radio frequency flooding to intercept signals from computers. While the signal's irradiance was too low to cause significant thermal heating, it was 100 times stronger than Soviet safety standards. In response, the U.S. government initiated Project Pandora, a top-secret DARPA program that exposed human and animal subjects to similar microwave parameters to determine if the radiation could be used for mind control or behavioral modification. Although the program was shut down in 1969 with the conclusion that the effects were too subtle, many embassy personnel reported severe headaches, inability to concentrate, and chronic stress. Ambassador Walter Stossel, who fell ill in 1975 with bleeding from the eyes, eventually died of leukemia, leading to persistent claims that the radiation was carcinogenic. It should come as no surprise then that the same, albeit more capable, weapons are deployed against an unsuspecting public. Targeted individuals report being remotely tortured, monitored, and manipulated through the use of electromagnetic frequencies that interact with the human nervous system. These claims often involve the transmission of sounds into the head, the induction of physical pain, and the remote control of bodily functions. Voice-to-skull technology is the community's term for the microwave auditory effect. This phenomenon involves the perception of sounds in the brain when it's exposed to certain pulsed microwave frequencies. The hearing of pulsed microwaves is a unique exception to normal auditory perception, which typically relies on airborne or bone-conducted sound waves. According to thermoelastic theory, the absorption of a single microwave pulse in the head causes a slight, rapid rise in temperature, which triggers a rapid thermal expansion of the brain tissue. This expansion launches a pressure wave that travels via bone conduction to the inner ear, where it activates cochlear receptors in the same manner as traditional sound. Depending on the pulse parameters, an individual may perceive this as a click, buzz, hiss, or knock. Targeted individuals believe this technology has been refined to allow for the remote transmission of clear spoken words directly into a target's mind. Victims of V2K describe a relentless psychological onslaught. The voices may mock the target, narrate their every move, or repeat their private thoughts back to them, a phenomenon often called remote neural monitoring. Victims also describe no-touch torture, including intense muscle contractions, artificial tinnitus, and pre-packaged dream sequences downloaded to their brains while they sleep. The goal of V2K is typically identified as the psychological breakdown of the victim, driving them toward a diagnosis of schizophrenia and discrediting them in the eyes of society. While early studies suggested the microwave auditory effect was a benign effect, research has highlighted the potential for significant neurological damage. A critical finding in recent computational modeling is that extremely high-power, short-duration pulses can generate mechanical stress waves within the brain that exceed traumatic brain injury thresholds. These stress waves can lead to permanent neuropathological damage and cognitive decline, all without a biologically significant rise in overall brain temperature. These high-power sub-millisecond RF pulses can induce neurological and neuropathological changes even while remaining within current regulatory safety guidelines. This suggests that the pulsed nature of the energy is more hazardous than continuous wave radiation of the same average power. Studies on animal subjects have shown that exposure to pulsed microwaves can lead to disturbed cognitive functions, including impairments in learning and memory. Such pulses can cause a reduction in dopamine release in the CA1 hippocampal region and structural synaptic deformations. Beyond these auditory attacks, TIs report a wide range of physical symptoms that include zaps, vibrations, sudden localized pain, often in the teeth or head, red eyes, and extreme fatigue. Many reports align with the Havana syndrome incidents. In late 2016, a series of mysterious health incidents began affecting U.S. and Canadian diplomats in Havana, Cuba. Victims reported a sudden onset of symptoms, including loud noises, pressure in the head, intense vertigo, nausea, cognitive deficits, and what some experts called the immaculate concussion, a concussion-like injury occurring without blunt force trauma. The National Academies of Sciences, Engineering, and Medicine concluded in a 2020 report that directed pulsed radiofrequency energy was the most plausible cause of these incidents. In a landmark ruling, the Social Security Administration granted disability benefits to a victim for Havana syndrome, contradicting earlier court findings that such claims were fantastical. The symptoms associated with Havana syndrome are now officially termed anomalous health incidents and have since been reported by over 1,500 United States officials across the globe. The covert, individualized application of directed energy weapons in Cuba thus establishes a troubling precedent for the overt deployment of similar non-lethal technology against civilian populations. The active denial system, for example, is intended as a non-lethal tool for crowd control, but it is nevertheless a directed energy weapon, The ADS operates at 95 gigahertz and utilizes the millimeter wave spectrum to induce a repel effect in human targets. By heating water molecules in the skin to a depth of only 0.4 millimeters, the system triggers an intolerable sensation of pain. This technology will soon be integrated into broader security frameworks like border protection and port security. While international safety guidelines are primarily designed to prevent tissue heating, many TIs, researchers, and advocates argue that long-term exposure to low-level radio frequency and electromagnetic frequencies causes cumulative biological harm. The implications of this are concerning because if the active denial system operating within the same millimeter wave spectrum as the ubiquitous 5G network can cause water cells to become excited, what does this suggest about the safety of 5G exposure? The possibility of covert energy weapons hidden in plain sight is not far out. Unlike previous generations of wireless technology, 5G utilizes millimeter waves within the 24 gigahertz to 100 gigahertz range. This requires a much denser deployment of small cells located nearer to human populations. Small cells are the compact, low-power wireless base stations that function as the critical physical infrastructure for 5G networks. The leading explanation concerning the biophysical interaction between 5G and human cells suggests that the polarized and coherent electromagnetic fields of 5G cause harm by forcing mobile ions within biological cells to oscillate synchronously with the field. This action exerts pressure on voltage-gated ion channels in the cell membrane, leading to their irregular opening or closing. This voltage-gated ion channel dysfunction disrupts the cell's delicate electrochemical balance, which in turn triggers oxidative stress and damage to DNA. Although industry guidelines imply that millimeter waves used in high-band 5G only affect the skin's surface, the short pulses involved can generate secondary waves known as Brillouin precursors. These precursors do not decay as rapidly as expected, allowing them to penetrate deeper into the body. Once inside, they could unwind large molecules and compromise the integrity of cell membranes. Targeted individuals perceive the proximity and non-thermal effects of 5G as a deliberate strategy to subject them to constant, low-level electromagnetic bombardment. These concerns are substantiated by data from the Oceania Radio Frequency Scientific Advisory Association, which indicates that approximately two-thirds of peer-reviewed experimental and epidemiological studies have shown significant biological effects from everyday wireless radiation. These effects include cellular oxidative stress, the overproduction of reactive oxygen species, which is a known precursor to autoimmune diseases, neurodegenerative conditions, and cancer, as well as mitochondrial damage, reproductive health issues, protein damage, and changes in cell membrane permeability. More concerning, however, is that the beamforming and massive MIMO capabilities of 5G allows a base station to direct a focused pencil beam of radio waves toward a specific device or individual. Targeted individuals believe this capability is used to track and zap them as they move through the urban environment. The integration of 5G with the Internet of Things means that every smart device in a target's home or environment can be co-opted into the surveillance and harassment network. 5G is therefore not only an environmental toxin that acts as a non-consensual experiment on the public, but a technology that is capable of being repurposed as a directed energy weapon. Furthermore, one of the most overwhelming fears reported by TIs is the ability of their adversaries to see through walls. Radio frequency sensing can now reconstruct the movements and even the breathing patterns of individuals inside a building. By capturing both phase and amplitude changes as Wi-Fi or 5G signals reflect, diffract, and scatter through a room, modern systems can reconstruct spatial layouts and detect the presence of human subjects even in non-line-of-sight conditions. With the introduction of 5G, we have achieved centimeter-level spatial resolution, capable of distinguishing between objects with a mean positioning error as low as 0.43 meters. This mapping is further refined through the latent CSI paradigm, where generative AI and diffusion models translate raw, echoey radio data into photorealistic representations of private spaces by mapping metrics into a latent space where AI fills in the gaps to generate high-resolution textures of room layouts and human postures through walls or in total darkness. When combined with 3D models of a home's layout harvested from real estate sites or Roomba mapping data, perpetrators can track a target's precise location within their most private spaces. For a TI, the knowledge that an adversary has a 3D map of their home means there is nowhere to hide. The 3D map serves as a tactical blueprint for psychological warfare that facilitates black bag jobs, unauthorized entries into the home, where items are moved or replaced to induce gaslighting, because the perpetrators know the exact layout and the locations of all furniture and cameras. The development of 3D mapping technologies such as LiDAR, simultaneous localization and mapping, and drone-based photogrammetry is not just a direct threat to the safety and privacy of targeted individuals, but to everyone. These technologies allow for the creation of high-fidelity digital twins of both public and private environments, enabling a level of spatial temporal analysis that was previously impossible. In the urban environment, elevated LiDAR and AI-powered video surveillance use 3D mapping to monitor pedestrian behavior with unprecedented accuracy. These systems can detect weapons, even if partially concealed, identify aggressive behavior patterns, and maintain continuous tracking of an individual across multiple camera feeds. The 3D mapping of the environment transforms the world into a tactical landscape, where every alleyway, entrance, and exit is known to the surveillance system. The mundane environment is reimagined as a prolific digital weapon system. Everyday infrastructure can be used as the architecture for a new kind of prison, an environment where adversaries can predict movement baselines and coordinate harassment with terrifying precision. The ability to 3D map any environment combined with pervasive wireless radiation creates a world of non-visualizable digital control, where the boundaries of private property offer no protection against surveillance, profiling, and behavioral prediction. The combination of this digitally mapped, weaponized environment with a growing arsenal of biometric and remote tracking capabilities escalates the threat to an even more insidious level. Law enforcement and surveillance technologies now utilize biometrics, including the detection of heartbeats, to identify and track individuals. RF sensing can extract heartbeat signatures to perform unauthorized tracking without the target carrying a device. Radio frequency and microwave radiation, acting as a biological stressor, can impact cardiac function from cellular disruption to muscle impairment. If a TI is identified by gait analysis, facial recognition, or any other biometric marker, the system can predict their movement and direct perpetrators to intersect with them at precise, high-impact moments. This leads to a belief in the adversary's omnipresence. With everything meticulously mapped and the potential for any object to be weaponized, anyone, anywhere, can become a target. This brings us to the question of how and why are victims selected. The selection of victims for gangstalking and electronic harassment is rarely seen as random. Instead, TIs identify several profiles of individuals who are likely to be placed on a target list. The motives for this selection range from individual retaliation to broader social engineering goals. A primary category of targets includes whistleblowers who have exposed illegal or unethical activities within corporations, law enforcement, or government agencies. Targeted individuals believe that organized harassment is a form of extrajudicial punishment used to silence them and deter others from coming forward. By branding the whistleblower as crazy through gaslighting and forced psychiatric labeling, the adversary ensures that any future disclosures are dismissed as delusions. In some cases, the selection is attributed to a fair game doctrine, where individuals who have somehow offended a powerful person or group are designated as targets for community-based harassment. Others believe they are chosen because they are vulnerable or expendable individuals with few social ties or resources who are unlikely to be missed if they disappear or are committed to an institution. This makes them ideal subjects for human experimentation with new surveillance and psychological warfare technologies. In the United States, TIs often point to regional fusion centers and the Suspicious Activity Reporting Program as the bureaucratic mechanism for their targeting. These centers, established after 9/11, facilitate information sharing between local and federal agencies, are accused of maintaining watch lists that include innocent citizens who have been reported for suspicious but legal behavior, such as taking photographs or expressing dissenting political views. Once an individual is on an SAR-based list, they may be subjected to lifelong surveillance and harassment under the guise of national security. A petition to the United States Supreme Court in 2024 argued that the Federal Bureau of Investigation unconstitutionally includes U.S. persons in secret categories of the terrorist screening database without meeting reasonable suspicion criteria. These individuals, categorized as domestic terrorists, are allegedly subjected to a life of torture involving DEW attacks. The petition highlights a significant intervening circumstance: the implementation of Department of Defense Directive 5240.01 on September 27, 2024. The petitioners argued that this directive essentially legalizes the use of military-grade weaponry, including DEWs, for intelligence activities in the homeland, effectively allowing the military to use lethal force against civilians. Ultimately, the goal of gangstalking and electronic harassment is the total isolation and destruction of the target's life. This is achieved through a multi-pronged attack on the target's social, professional, and psychological stability. TIs frequently report workplace mobbing and the systematic destruction of their professional reputations. Perpetrators may contact employers with anonymous tips or libelous claims about the target's character or competence. This often leads to termination of employment and difficulty finding new work, a process known as blacklisting. Financial ruin is a key component of the isolation strategy, as it leaves the target without the means to seek legal or medical help or to secure their environment. The crazy-making campaign is perhaps the most devastating isolation tactic. By subjecting the target to improbable, technologically advanced forms of harassment, the perpetrators ensure that the target will sound delusional if they try to explain their situation to friends or family. This often leads to the bribery or manipulation of the target's own social circle, where family members are told the target is mentally ill and needs to be monitored for their own safety. The result is a total loss of support, leaving the target entirely at the mercy of their harassers. Advocacy groups state that the ultimate aim of these campaigns is to drive the target to self-destructive behavior or taking their own lives. By creating an environment of constant fear, sleep deprivation, and physical pain, the perpetrators aim to break the target's will. If suicide is not achieved, the goal is often psychiatric commitment, which effectively neutralizes the target and ensures they are permanently discredited. One of the most perplexing questions for both TIs and outside observers is why thousands of people would participate in the harassment of a stranger. TIs believe that the perpetrator network is sustained by a combination of financial incentives, ideological manipulation, and social engineering. Many low-level perpetrators are believed to be hired strangers, recruited through online platforms like Craigslist or as part of private security contracts. These individuals may receive recruitment and relocation incentives or small stipends to perform specific surveillance tasks. Another motivating factor may be the framing of gangstalking as a form of community policing or social justice activism. Attackers may use fear and urgency or human curiosity to lure people into participating in surveillance tasks. By framing the harassment as a game, the adversary removes the human empathy from the interaction, turning the destruction of a life into a social activity for the participants. Participants may be told that the target is a dangerous criminal, such as a pedophile or a terrorist, who has escaped justice, and that by harassing them, the community is keeping itself safe. This moral justification allows otherwise decent people to participate in cruel and illegal acts without feeling culpability, as they believe they are serving a higher purpose. For these participants, gangstalking is simply a job, and the target is merely a subject or terror suspect they are being paid to monitor. In the United States, justification for these attacks may also stem from the ethos of utilitarianism. The U.S. has a history of conducting covert research on its own citizens without their consent or awareness. Harm to the individual subject has historically been weighed against the perceived benefit to the collective security of the nation. In this paradigm, Vulnerable populations, including the poor, the institutionalized, the incarcerated, and even lower-ranking service members, are often selected due to their lack of social capital and inability to provide or withhold informed consent. Regardless of the reasons for targeting, concerned individuals can draw on various tactics to mitigate directed energy attacks. This involves minimizing radio frequency exposure by increasing distance from devices, using wired connections rather than wireless, and employing physical shields like aluminum foil, copper fabric, mylar, and Faraday cages to block energy frequencies. Water-filled containers and household plants can also be used to attenuate microwave radiation. Similarly, many TIs practice what is called earthing. Earthing is a component of electromagnetic hardening. It is a protective activity to safeguard a person against the effects of electromagnetic radiation by conducting the Earth's natural electric charge into the body. While earthing can't mitigate the effects of directed energy attacks, it can reduce the body's induced voltage from ambient environmental electricity. Essentially, it is a way to lessen the electromagnetic stress on oneself by stabilizing the body's bioelectrical environment, rather than by blocking external transmissions. Ultimately, the Global Tech Panopticon has materialized the mechanisms of the targeted individual's persecution. Directed energy attacks are invisible, traceless, and psychologically devastating. Consequently, the targeted individual's experience no longer represents an isolated anomaly, but is instead indicative of a framework of society where the convergence of AI-driven behavioral prediction and ubiquitous sensing renders everyone a potential target of state and corporate control. As the industry moves towards 6G and the sub-terahertz spectrum, the distinction between communication, sensing, and energy delivery will continue to obfuscate. Future networks will likely incorporate reconfigurable intelligent surfaces and holographic beamforming, further increasing the ability to manipulate electromagnetic environments. As technology continues its relentless march toward universal integration, the distinct status of targeted individuals will likely cease to exist simply because every citizen will become a potential, trackable, and controllable target. The defining lines that once separated communication, sensory perception, and unilateral control will ultimately and irrevocably vanish, leaving a socio-technological framework where privacy is rendered obsolete and non-conformity is instantly detectable and addressable. This systemic erosion of personal autonomy, first experienced by the TI, represents the final phase of control over the human domain.